welcome to Money Making Sense, the show that talks about all things money. We are doing our tax tip series. Joining me today is Susan Spears. You are the CEO of UACPA.
Yes.
So welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We've got a lot of acronyms in there.
CPA, UACPA, so it's the Utah Association of Certified Public Accountants. I'm a CPA, have been for about 35 years now.
Yes, and you are my go-to person when I have questions.
And yeah, here we go.
All right. So you have been helping out, or at least following very closely. You've been in the legislature for the last year almost, with Utah's tax reform.
Yes.
Now, I know a lot of states are dealing with tax reform, but Utah just went through this. And amazingly, they actually got a bill passed.
For a minute.
For literally 1 minute.
Right.
And the public revolted.
Yes.
I have not seen this in my time in the newsroom, where the public that quickly I mean, you've seen like some organizations come together and get some signatures, but never enough to turn over a law.
Very, very little do you see a referendum override what we just did.
In like 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was lickety-split. This law that passed is gone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we have a lot that we can learn from it.
Yes.
I mean, I hope that us as Utahns, I hope that our legislature learned a few lessons. I would hope that any of you people listening around the country, around the world, can maybe learn a few lessons from us so you don't have to graduate from the School of Hard Knocks.
Right. So we probably need to give people a little bit of background about what some of the big problems are with Utah's tax law as it stands right now.
Okay.
One of the big things is Utah, first of all, Utah does collect state income tax.
Yes.
So there are 44 states around the country that do collect state income tax.
Correct.
There are 6 that don't, 2 that are most notorious, Nevada, because they get their money from gambling.
Right.
And Washington State, those are 2 that I know of, in Texas, I think.
Wyoming, next door to us.
Next door to us, Wyoming. So they do not collect state income tax. Now, of these 44 states that do collect the income tax from your personal state, 8 of them will put some of that money toward education expenses. Some.
Being the operative word there.
Exactly, just some. Utah, however, it's in our law, it's in our code, 100% of every dollar collected from state income taxes goes to fund education.
That's correct. Therein lies a hurdle for Utah. You know, I mean, we talk about how we're the lowest dollar per pupil spending for students in our state, but yet we're giving all this income tax, 100% earmarked, constitutionally bound to do that. On the other hand, we have the general fund, which is our sales tax that funds everything else legislatively. So we'll oftentimes hear, I mean, I'll be up on the Hill listening to different things going on. Our legislatures will talk about how their hands are tied behind their back, basically, because we have this earmark that they can't dip into. No other state has that. We've got a handful of states. You might say 14% of the budget shall go to education, 30%, 100%. So there's a whole conversation right there, you know, from a Utah standpoint that needs to be had. From balancing the budget. We are also constitutionally bound to have a balanced budget here in the state of Utah.
Right, which a lot of states don't.
Exactly.
So, and that's having a balanced budget is sort of the envy of most of the rest of the United States, because we were thriving even in the worst of the recession.
Yes.
I mean, things got a little tough in some areas, but basically the state was still running. We had no debts. We weren't like, oh, please, federal government, please send us some more money.
Right.
In fact, we funded the federal government when they were in a complete shutdown, and we ran our own national parks.
Exactly, exactly. So huge kudos to Utah because we had the rainy day fund.
Right.
And we are fiscally responsible, and you have to take your hat off to our governor and the legislature for even saying, you know what, we're coming up upon a little bit of a fiscal cliff here. The way we spend money is changing. We're like every other state. You've probably heard we're a service-based state, not a goods. I mean, you've probably heard that term.
Right.
It's not just Utah. This is nationally. We're buying more services than we are goods. So we're seeing our sales tax revenue go on the decline, which means everything that we're trying to fund.
Right. And that would be, so since state income tax, like my paycheck, for every $100 that I earn, 4.95% of that, or $4.95, for every $100 I make, goes to fund education.
Correct.
But when I go out and I buy a pizza and they charge, sales tax on that, that sales tax goes to fund road work, maintenance,
Medicaid services.
Medicaid, yeah, all those other items. So that's what you were saying is, because we're not buying as much goods in the state, and in Utah, the services, like if you get a massage or you go to the doctor,
Right.
or they don't charge sales tax for those services. So our fund is dropping to pay for road maintenance and all of that.
Yeah, comparatively for the expenses that we need to deal with within the state. And nobody, of course nobody wants to pay any more in tax than they have to. Granted, that's true. So I think we have to kind of back up a little bit. At the end of last session in 2019, there was a bill that was run. It was kind of jammed through the end of the session that basically taxed anything and everything.
Right.
That's the beginning. That's kind of another beginning of our adventure here.
Yes. Well, I want to touch on that. I know it's sort of I think it's a big piece. The thing is okay, I think everybody can agree when you lay it out that, hey, maybe 100% of our income tax should not be going to education.
Yeah.
And how do we take care of that? So yeah, some reform is needed. And so the legislature, I think it was like the last 10 days. And the legislature is in session for over 6 weeks. And the last 10 days they went, let's reform stuff. And they just wrote a bill, they threw it through. And the outcry was outrageous because they wanted to tax
Everything. Well, it was problematic. We had
hair going to get a haircut. It would have
Right.
taxed your haircut.
Well, we would have taxed medical. We would have taxed piano teachers. We would have taxed anything. I mean, everything. And
Right.
what we saw was tax pyramiding, and this was a huge concern of the bill. I remember the bill dropped. It was like 48 hours before the first hearing.
Right.
It was 260 pages of bill, and I tell you, I remember it dropped like at 7:10 p.m.
Oh, of course.
This was a
And you were there because you are CEO of UACPA. That's, as an accountant.
So we're watching this not only from a CPA perspective, but even with our organization, we feel like we have a public interest,
Right.
that we need to educate citizenry as to what's going on there.
Yeah.
So we saw this going on, and I remember, I was in public practice for about 30 years. It's still near and dear to my heart. So I'm seeing this tax pyramiding going on where there was tax upon tax upon tax. Well, the interesting thing about the first bill that went through was there was a hearing. It dropped a hearing 48 hours later or whatever. And we of course, we were up there. We were not pleased with the bill. We weren't happy with what it was going to be doing. We were very concerned tax on services, especially tax on professional services, because that's where we saw a lot of the pyramiding. And we knew at the end of the day, the tax comes down to you and I. Joe Q. Public, we pay that tax.
Yeah.
So we testified opposing the bill. Now, there were probably well over 30 organizations or individuals that testified on that bill. Only 3 were in favor of the bill.
And who were they?
That was our state governor's office, Salt Lake Chamber, and a bank.
Because they would be the ones getting the money.
Well, or they
Essentially.
were... I think that we could philosophize was whatever. The governor certainly had a directive, lower the base.
Right.
Lower the rate, broaden the base. Good tax policy, but it was interesting that first with 3 people in favor of the bill, let's say 27 others opposing the bill, it cleared committee with only 2 opposing votes. That was the first. For me as a CPA, as a citizen, that was a huge red flag.
Right.
And dropping the last week of session.
Yeah.
It was like, we knew, we knew that there was going to be a tax reform bill, and we would keep saying, when's it going to drop, when's it going to drop? We need to see what's going on here.
Yeah. But basically, legislatures were trying to hide it in the last week and get it signed and going. Because it's always the last 2 days when they're like, oh, we have 450 bills we got to go through, and they just sign nobody reads it. They just sign everything.
Well, and that's kind of scary too.
Yeah.
So, but there was a pretty big stink that went up on that. I mean, we had a lot of intel, if you will, and it was like, we're going to ramrod this through. But I have to thank the public, and I mean, I'll say our organization played a huge role in this, with saying, you know what, public, you got to get on here. You got to understand what's going on here. Your life's about ready to change.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not. It may not be for the good. You got to
Right.
understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So they pulled the bill back at the last minute with a few days to go.
Yeah.
And they created in its place, a bill was passed creating this tax restructuring task force.
Right.
And they started out great. They had principles. This is what we want to accomplish. They did some town hall meetings around the state. We attended. I think I went to like 6 of 8 of them or whatever, and then they had some hearings afterwards. And there was some good ideas, some good policy put together, but it was almost like you got almost to the finish line and you fell. I mean,
Yeah.
the bill was ultimately passed.
Right. But here's the thing, what I saw, and I'm sure not every single little detail from the original bill that they tried to push through at the last minute in last year's legislature, what they presented 9-10 months later, pretty much almost the same as what they were trying to push through the first time.
There was quite a bit of change to it. There was actually quite a bit of change to it. It was watered down quite a bit. I mean, but there was some controversial and some contentious items on there.
Right. And the biggest one we have to point out before you go to is taxing food.
Yep.
Well, we already have a tax on food. Almost doubling the tax on food that
Yeah.
you buy at grocery stores or anything else.
Right.
So that was one of the big things of contention that wound up on this bill. So please continue.
So yeah, we saw the tax on food, and there were hearings that started after the town hall meetings. There was summaries and whatnot. Then there was another set of hearings that went on up on the Hill. We attended all those, whether virtually. I mean, I was out of town a few times, and I remember sitting in my hotel room listening. I mean, and the citizenry. A common comment that I heard was, "Why are you trying to run this through so fast? Why does it need to be done before Christmas? What about tax on food? And what about education?" So again, for me, I mean, I'm not a legislator. I don't have votes to take care of. I don't, my concern is, what are we doing here? You're a public servant. Let's listen to our constituents.
To the public.
Let's listen to the public. I mean, if I were queen for a day, I probably would have done things a little differently. We never had the conversation with regards to education and this earmark. So we kind of felt like that can was kicked down the road a little bit. Some good policy in that bill. The passed and then was repealed a minute later,
Right.
But I think that the lessons to be learned from a legislative standpoint was, we lost a little bit of trust with our people.
Yeah.
I mean, the first bill was not kind at all. We should have listened. And we did a little bit. But people were awake, but now they're really awake. So, it's like busted twice. 3 times either got to be a charm or 3 strikes are out.
Right. So I want to go back to when they finally decided to put this second bill together, and they had to call a special session of the legislature to get it passed. And that was right before Christmas.
Yes,
as
I remember.
You said. So in there, we found out that, and through every town hall meeting, you heard, don't raise the tax on food tax, increase the tax on foods. You think that some of that was okay? I mean, just...
It's a tough, Heather, it's a tough question to answer. Tax on food, if you think of it from a tax policy standpoint, it's stable. I mean, it kind of stabilizes the policy everybody's going to eat. That being said, regardless of how good we think our economy is, we have people that struggle.
Right.
And let's show a little bit of compassion here.
Yeah.
And so to try to offset that, what was written into the bill was there would be some grocery credits, 125 per person. And if I recall, I think it went up to about 75, making 75,000
Right.
in a four-person family.
Okay.
So,
So if you had 4 people in your family and your max income was $75,000 among those 4 people, you could get a credit of $125 a year to help pay this extra tax
right.
on the food.
Right. However,
My issue is that legislators don't, because this is a little bit of a separate issue, but legislators make a fair amount of money.
yeah.
They do. No matter how much they cry about, oh, how much work we do, and I'm sorry, you work 6 weeks out of the year and you get a good amount of money for
Yeah,
that.
I mean, they get paid for that, but many of them have their own businesses.
Right.
They have their day jobs,
Right.
if you will.
And they couldn't do the 6 weeks of legislature if they weren't earning enough money to be able to take that time off to do it. So
Right.
they earn a fair amount of money. I don't think they understand the struggle for I'm going to just go single person here. If you earn less than $35,000 or $30,000 a year,
It's tough.
it is tough. So you give me $125 for the entire year, even if it's up front. Do you think I'm going to go, oh, well, here's $6 every week for the next year that I'm just going to put aside to pay for my taxes on my No, it's $125 and I just got a sprained ankle or you need whatever. That $125 is going to pay off the medical bills that I
Right.
already can't afford.
Right.
And then I still have to go buy my food and it's going to cost more. The legislators do not understand when you are struggling that this nice, pretty little credit they want to give people isn't worth much.
Right. And I think that's caused a lot of consternation. And I think that was the basis for this referendum repeal. I think people felt exactly that. That it was kind of like we were blindsided. There's some good things in the bill. I mean, we had some dependent exemptions added back on the state side that were taken away with the Jobs Act, the year before. I mean, there were some good things with some good offsets, but my opinion is we didn't educate our people. I go back and saying, if I were queen for a day,
Right.
you hear me say that once in a while. I think what I would have done is I would have taken this bill as drafted out on the road and done another set of town hall meetings, and we probably would have come back with a better bill. Not only that, we have to have the education conversation, and I don't know if anyone dares do that.
Right. So during all of these town hall meetings where pretty much everyone was saying, don't raise the food tax. And on top of that, part of this reform that Utah desperately needs is to not put 100% of our state income tax toward education. This bill didn't address the education portion at all. And on top of that, they went, oh, we don't care what everybody said, don't raise our food taxes. They did it anyway.
And that's where we've got a little bit of angst. I mean, there were a few little nips and tucks, that hit education, but I think that if we're to give our legislators a good toolbox, I do think that there is issue with 100% tax, 100% income tax earmarked.
Right.
I think that proves challenging. I would bet that we have data. For me, it would be interesting. I mean, you know me, I'm kind of a numbers girl.
Right.
It would be interesting to go back, let's say 30 years worth of budgets, and let's look at what percent of each year's budget was education. And let's kind of gather that information together, and maybe come up with, well, education's right around 28, 31%. What if we presented this information to the people? I think we have to have that conversation and said, so what if we changed that earmark and went from 100 to, let's say, no less than 33%, or whatever that number looks like, and presented it and be able to show citizenry, we're smart as Utahns, we're pretty smart people.
Right.
Say, you know what, this is what we've been doing over the last years. My concern if we don't have this conversation, especially as during these good economic times, we keep stacking money up in the education side that we can't spend on anything else. I think we're going to start to see gymnastics up on the Hill as to how can we use this education money and kind of tweak things and rename things in the name of education so that we can transfer money over into the general fund to take care of things.
Right.
I mean, we all have budgets, you know.
Right. And if they start tweaking that, but do it under the guise of education, but the money isn't really going to education, the public isn't going to really know that that's happening.
Well, that's, yeah, and do we really want to deceive our public? You know, like I say, I think that a lot of heads can come up with some good solutions.
Right.
And I will say we have good people up on the Hill. I mean, I think for the most part they try to do what's right. I think that I think that we kind of get away from, we need to listen to our constituents, you know.
Yeah. Instead, they're listening to their own pocketbooks and who's paying and who, you know.
You don't know. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, there are a lot of things that are pulling at you, and there's some. I mean, you look at our education. I mean, you look at the strong force our education is here in the state, and we hear all the time, you know, don't be pulling money from the children.
Right.
And I think don't use our children as pawns. Let's have an adult conversation over this and really see what we've got to do to strengthen our state. And let's let other states learn as well, because every state's struggling with this. This service thing is a big deal.
Yeah. I think, sort of going back to your point about not using the children as pawns, if we went back and looked at 30 years worth of how much of the actual budget was earmarked for education. If we brought in, let's say it's $100 million every year for education, but only 80 million of it ever gets spent at most every year, and you're sitting with $20 million left over every year that didn't get spent, that's what we need to look at. Not, oh, we're pulling the money away. Well, there's 20 million that you never used for the kids to begin with. So,
but I think the opposite is also true. We budget 100 million for our schools. We use that 100 million, but our income tax revenues, let's say, are 120 million. So that 20 million sits in the rainy day fund for education. I can't pull that 20 million over to the general fund right now.
right.
So I think that poses some questions as well, because, you know, yeah, we want to pay our teachers good salaries and all this other kind of stuff, but let's remember we also have needs coming out of the general fund with our state employees, and they need to be paid at parity as well.
Yeah.
And are we doing that? I mean, I think that that's an issue, and if we're paying one set of employees, state employees over here, one of my questions has been, if we're paying state employees over here, let's say our educators, X amount, and we're giving them their 3% annual raise or whatever that looks like, are we doing the same with our other state employees? And if we are not, is there a
tweak.
little tweak, and what do we do with that imbalance there?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for me, you know me, I come up with a million different questions going a million different directions.
Right.
And I mean, we need these services that are coming out of the general fund.
I do want to touch on really quickly as we wrap up, what is the legislature doing moving forward? Because now we're exactly 1 year later from when the very first bill was tried to get rushed through.
Right.
And we're in the middle of the next legislative session right now. And I am hearing a little bit of scuttlebutt that some of the legislators are trying to pull some of the stuff from the failed bill and try to just pass them through individually.
We've kind of heard the same scuttlebutt, but I've also heard, you know, and I've been up there as well, the wind's kind of been taken out of their sails on tax reform, and there's really no interest in dealing with anything tax reform. We track bills, what's going on. As of right now, we haven't seen anything popping up out of this old bill, you know, as a standalone. I mean, common sense would kind of tell me there'd be a few things that maybe you'd want to pull out, but we're not seeing anything yet.
Okay.
So it's kind of one of those,
They're going to
Hurry
wait
up.
until the 2 days before the end of the
Right.
session, and they're going to pull out what they want and try to pass it.
Yes, it's kind of one of those hurry up and wait and stay tuned things. You know?
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you want to talk to us about tax reform? And the big reason why we're talking about tax reform is whatever happens with any type of taxes, reform or not, it shows up on when you have to file your taxes
Absolutely.
every year. So that's
Yeah.
why we're here and we're talking about that. But is there
Yeah.
anything else we haven't touched on?
I think that, you know, we've hit a lot of things, but I think from a citizenry standpoint, I mean, and that's kind of where we're hitting this from. I think that we need to be aware. I mean, it's kind of time to get back to understanding at least the basics of, you know, what does our budget look like? I mean, how does this work? I'm not saying you need to have like a bachelor's in policy,
Right.
but some basic, as citizens, I think we need to have some basic knowledge and understanding how the state's budget works, because it certainly does affect how our personal budgets work. And just to be involved so that we don't have these kind of these big drama things happen when a bill's tried to pass, because I think that maybe had citizenry been a little more involved, maybe some of this drama could have been cut out, or at least
Right.
we could have had better, robust dialogue. This is something all states are going through.
Yeah.
And I will say that what Utah does, many states will look at. I mean, we're a leader.
We are. That's what I started off the episode saying, that many states are very jealous because we have it mandated that we must have a balanced budget.
Yeah.
And we have for many
Yeah.
years. And we are thriving when so
Yes.
many other states are still struggling in total from the Great Recession that they just never have climbed out of.
Right.
Now we have areas of our state that haven't quite climbed
Absolutely.
up, but
Yep.
for the most part, Utah is just like, woohoo.
We're number one.
Yeah.
So whatever Utah does, people are going to watch. So I think there's a little extra pressure. It's kind of like when you're the champion.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's over. It means, you know what, I got to step up my game.
Yeah.
And I have to say kudos to our legislators for wanting to step ahead of this and say, you know what, we see this coming in the future. We need to be prepared.
Right.
So at least we're having the conversations. We've mucked things up a little bit,
Right.
but we're having the
But they
conversations.
need to be prepared and
They need to be prepared to take the beating.
the beating and have the hard conversation, like you said, about education. Education, people, please address how you're going to fix that first. Don't try to tack on taxes somewhere else until you've addressed education. That's my advice.
Yeah.
And second of all, don't rush it through. Even I don't know if they thought 9 months wasn't a rush job, but the last time we had tax reform, like 18 years ago.
2007.
Oh, 2007?
Yeah.
It took them 3 years. They
Yes.
started in 2004 and finally got it all done in 2007. Why they thought they could do the same type of reform in 10 days the first time they tried, and then went, oh, but we'll just do it in 9 months. Like, really?
Yeah.
Please take another 3 years to work it out.
Right.
Talk to the public for real.
Yeah.
Don't just listen. They were not even listening. They may have had people talking, but I don't think they were listening at all. So actually listen this time. And education, address it.
Right. And we all have a role to play in this.
Yeah.
All of us.
All right. So if anybody needs help with a CPA, because if your state actually did reform the taxes, you're probably going to need a little bit of help working that one out. But basically, go to uacpa.org to find a CPA that's right for you.
Thanks for being a Money Making Sense listener. Follow your common sense on the social media. Money Making Sense on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.